Alright, so I went to Lowe's and got 4 1x10 boards, and I'm just cutting them down to the rough size right now. I could have done this with plywood or OSB or something. I just felt better going with a 1x10 pine. And they are the correct thickness. They're 3/4 inch thick, even though a 1x is called a 1x. It's actually 3/4 inch thick because of the finish. So, once I got them cut to the pretty close size, I just went ahead here and clamped them to the actual panels that they were going to go to and traced out the ends with a marker so then I can cut them out with a jigsaw. And side note, the 2 side boards that go up and down, straight up and down, were 8 inches as what I measured with the foam boards that were on there. And the front and back panels that were sloped are actually 9 inches. Because of the slope, it's a longer distance. So when I cut them down on the table saw, the side boards were 8 inches and the 2 front and back boards were 9 inches. So once I got them all laid out here and cut to size, I'm going to go ahead and make sure everything's clean with my drill and brass wire brush. Like I said before, I didn't want to hit this with a hand grinder and a steel brush for fear that it would shred through it like a pop can, because it is 1 mil thick aluminum. So, before I start fastening anything, I have to router in, countersink kinda, the brackets that actually hold up the roof, what fastens to your lift assembly in your hoist. So, I check with my cardboard here that as I tore apart, I wrote down all my measurements. And I'm not exactly sure how, but my measurements are wrong. When I actually marked out on the board and then tried to line it up on the camper, they did not line up, not at all. And like I said, I clearly marked my measurements. So, to make sure these things fit in the right spots, I just went ahead and took my board and laid it up against the side of the hoist, right where it would go in place, and marked out my front and my rear where the bracket will sit in my center. Made sure that everything was lined up. Made sure it was flush and sitting where it needed to sit. Confirmation that my measurements were all wrong. I still don't know how. So then I got them routed in right where they belong. And before I go ahead and fasten them in, I need to make sure that they fit. You know, even though I checked it twice, my measurements were already wrong once. So I'm just double checking to ensure that they do actually fit where they're supposed to and how they're supposed to. Now that we got a confirmation that they do in fact fit, then we can go ahead and glue them to the aluminum shell. So, on my first 2 boards here, I wasn't exactly sure what to use. I used liquid nail, just regular old liquid nail. And later found out that this did not work. It physically held it in place, but there was no structure to it. And when I was jostling the camper roof around, moving it around, little head in the project, the sideboards both come off. And much to my disappointment, there was almost no holding ability. I mean, literally, I took a putty knife and scraped all of the liquid nail right off the camper shell and the wood. The liquid nail did not stick to the wood or the aluminum. So, now I'm gluing on my front and rear boards. And at this point, I still don't know that the liquid nail didn't hold. I won't find that out here for another minute or two. But luckily for me, when I stopped at the hardware store, I grabbed some Loctite brand construction adhesive. And just coming out of the tube, I felt better about it. The liquid nail come out as kind of a dry paste, whereas the Loctite brand construction glue came out in a more gooey kind of liquidy form. Not liquid, just gooey, like actual glue. And going on, I felt better about it. So, now that I got all my sideboards, I think, glued in place, now it's time to cut out the plywood for the roof. And there is a seam going down the aluminum right through the center of the camper. And I left it in place until I was ready to glue this. So I cut out the plywood for the roof going in the opposite direction of the seam. The length of the camper was 40 inches, so I cut out two 40-inch panels to span the length. Now here I am removing the seam, and as I shake it around, I'm about to find out the glue did not hold. Alright, so I've had my first fail. The liquid nail that I used to glue the board to the aluminum did not hold. So I chiseled it all off, and I didn't find that out. I don't think this was glued very good either. These ones that I just glued, I did not use liquid nail. I used something comparable, but Loctite brand premium construction adhesive. So we shall see. But now I have to re-glue that one and probably that one. So now that I'm cleaning up my liquid nail mess that didn't hold, I'm going to finish clamping the front and rear boards. And if you'll notice, I put a 1x6 or a 1x8 on the outside of the aluminum. The board that I am gluing to the aluminum on the inside is, distributing the force across the aluminum so the glue gets a nice spread and good contact. And you want to sandwich the aluminum in between another board so it does the same on the outside and doesn't just get a small contact patch from the clamp. You want big, even force all the way across that aluminum. So, I want to get my plywood centered up here. The side boards and front and rear boards, they all just go right at the bottom of the aluminum, so they're easy to place. But just to make sure, I sit here and make sure everything is directly in place and where I want it before I add the glue and put it permanently in place. So you can see both my sheets of plywood do fit in there. Make sure they're all centered. And then break out your glue. So I put a healthy heaping load of glue on there, construction adhesive, and weighted it down for the night. Let it dry. As much weight as I could find, just laying around the shop. So it's the next morning, everything's dried up. Everything's looking good. Now, unfortunately, I do have to re-glue my sideboards again and the other half of the plywood. And for this portion of it, I went to the hardware store and asked them what they recommended. And I ended up using the Gorilla brand construction adhesive. And they made two of them. There was a, mega strength. And then there was a super mega double awesome extra strength. And it was like $4 more too. But I got the super mega awesome double hold anything strength Gorilla Glue. Because I really don't want to do this again. For the $8 extra that it cost for the two tubes, well worth it. And it did really seem to hold good. So it's sitting, this video's being narrated after it's all back together, and it's hanging on the camper. So safe to say it worked. So I like to draw my pretty pictures in glue. You know, obviously do your outside, and then I kind of like make some little wagon wheels in there and finish off the tube. Make it look pretty that nobody will ever see. And then again, I had to weight it down and let it dry for the night. And unfortunately, this day that it was very cold. So I tarped it and shoved a little electric heater in there and let it dry. This episode brought to you by Stoney's Beer. Good for holding down stuff while you're gluing it. So now that everything's glued into place, I need to get the shell actually located, get all my corners put in place, get my weather stripping on, line everything up, get it squared up, make sure everything looks good, because I'm going to be adding a little center brace throughout the roof because I'm going to add some additional weight. So I'm going to give it a little extra structure. So just in the process here, I'm taking my tape measure, making sure everything's going to line up when it sits back down on the camper before I fasten it in place. Once I get it all squared up and where it needs to go, it's a simple matter of putting in the angle iron brackets in the corners. They are the main structure of the corner support, and then once I get it back up on, I will build some new exterior corners out of aluminum. But I just go ahead and mark out my roof where I'm going to be putting the extra structure and support. And it's nothing crazy. I used a total of 4 2x3 boards for this project. And I wanted it to sit as high as I possibly could in the roof of the camper because I am tall. And I did not take a floor to ceiling measurement beforehand. And I did not want to hit my head. I'm 6'2" and I naturally hit my head on more stuff than you want to know. So I took my time, notched everything out so it all fit together interlockingly, and had as much archway clearance in the center as possible where you'd be walking. And this was a more time-consuming project than I thought, but it was worth it. It looks nice, it works nice. So now that I got it all cut out, pieced together, designed the way that I wanted it, I am going to go ahead and glue and screw it all together. Give yourself a heaping of wood glue on there. And I got some squeezy clamps just to keep it in place while I'm actually screwing it together. And you can see there that I put a corner gusset on every corner. That's just a 2x4 laid on its side with 245s cut into it for each corner gusset. So I have a total of 12 corner gussets just to make sure everything stays straight, stays square, and adds that little bit of extra structure. So when you pop the roof up and it's wiggling around maybe in the wind, it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't separate. And I feel very good about it. I liked it a lot. And in the process here, my stepmother's playing with a chainsaw, which is kind of scary. So I just put a finish sand on it, and for some reason my belt sander kept blowing paper off. I'm not quite sure why. I think it was just old paper. Haven't used that belt sander in a number of years. But it did get done. I don't want any splinters in my head. But the belt sander was just for the joints, and then I go over it with a finish sander. Something like 220 grit. Just to make it feel nice, look nice. And now that I have the roof brace built, now I'm ready to prep all my surfaces and get ready for paint and stain. And I've been walking around on this thing for like a week now, so you can tell one heck of a difference between where my greasy footprints were and where I sanded and cleaned it. Painting over that dirt and grease would not be good. So You know, like any type of paint, you make sure your surface is prepped. Once it's prepped, me and Dad we're going to get it up on the horses, and I'm going to put a coat of paint on it. I was undecided on what color to do, and my dad recommended, and I went with his recommended to do the roof in white and then stain the roof brace. I was going to stain the whole thing and give it kind of a natural wood finish, but I think the white and stain mix give it a little bit of an offset. You know what I mean? So that is what I did. So I'm getting close to putting the roof back on, and I was going to reuse the original metal brackets that fastened it to the roof, but two of them were in good shape and two of them were in pretty poor shape. So I decided to make four new ones out of stainless. And I had some old stainless grill laying around just for parts and pieces. And I took that sheet metal and made some new ones. And it is thinner metal. I mean, it's thin metal. But the factory ones were actually very thin metal. And they rusted out and they were in very poor shape. I'm surprised they didn't use anything heavier. But this stainless that I used, just a grill that I pulled out of the trash, is much harder and much heavier than what was on their factory. So I get it shaped up, and I'm taking the two bolts that were actually in the original top of the other one and locating them on the top so they have a captured nut on top, so it is just as factory was, so I don't have to have a nut and bolt on there. When it comes time to put the camper roof on, I just set the roof on and screw the two nuts. So you can see there that I already put the aluminum on. I'm going to cover that in a different video. But now I'm getting ready for my final install on the roof. So I go ahead and put my weather stripping back on. And that is where the screw holes actually locate the depth for your brackets. So once I get my weather stripping back on, put the lift assembly brackets back on, get everything screwed back into place the way it should be. That way when we pick it up, it doesn't fall apart. And it is finally that time. And it's definitely heavier than when it went on. I figure when we took it off, it weighed about 175 pounds, 200 pounds, and it probably should have weighed 50 pounds less, but all the styrofoam was waterlogged. And when we put it back on, it weighed between 250 and 300 pounds. So I added 35 to 50% more weight to the roof, which the Wiffle Tree did not like, the lift mechanism. But I'm going to be adding solar panels and stuff on top, and roof racks on top, so it had to be heavier. So now I'm onto my corner brackets, and I tried PVC pipe with a heat gun to melt them and form them, and I was not happy with that. So I went back to some thin gauge aluminum and shaped it on the workbench to a 90-degree angle, put a split down the center, and folded the two tops over each other, and then just heated it with a torch and tapped on it to get it form fitted to the camper roof real nice. And I was pretty happy with this. And not to mention, there is the magic thing called silicone. So, any imperfections that were not perfectly flush and tight will be filled in with silicone. And it will still be waterproof. So, apply your heavy layer of silicone to everything. Get some self-tapping sheet metal screws and put them in place. And then we got a nice finished rounded corner. And they actually come out pretty good. I tried forming them around a piece of 1-inch pipe first, but the corner wasn't sharp enough, so I ended up just doing it on the flat edge of the workbench and making it almost a true 90, like a sharp 90. And they did. They come out real nice. So now it's time to put the canvas back on. So go ahead and open everything back up. Make it start to look like a camper. Now I piled all my parts and pieces back there against the wall in order so I could find them, locate them. And I took my speed square here and just drew a line in pencil across all four sides and put a line where my strips have to go that will support the canvas. I think it was like 2.5 inches or something up. But once I get that line in, I start to fasten them in. And I put my door in to make sure everything was up into height where it should be. And now that it is, take the door back out, make myself some room, and start putting in the canvas. Now this piece was a little bit tight, so I dropped it down, but the rest went in right where it should be. And I found it easier to take the rail off the roof and slide the rail onto the rubber strip of the canvas first, and then just lift it up and screw it into place into my existing holes where I had already located it. They give you a very limited amount of room on each side to slide the rubber stripping in for the canvas, and this worked out so much easier to just slide the rail on the canvas and then hold it up and screw it in. Like a million times easier. And even by myself, it went really easy. But real quick, it's starting to look like a camper again. I like it. Even though you can see daylight through parts of the canvas that you shouldn't. But we'll get to that later. That's on the to-do list. Alright, so this is where I'm going to leave off the camper restoration video. The roof is back on, and though the wiffle tree gave me some grief, we got it taken care of with a new hand crank version. Well, it was hand crank before, but now it's a different hand crank. So, our roof is up under our own weight. I did add a considerable amount of weight. If I had to guess, I'd guess 125 pounds over the wood, or over the foam that was in there, even though the foam was all waterlogged. Now, I do still have to reattach the awning strip. It is not in place, but I'll save that for another day till I paint it, put it back in. But you can even see, we got water laying on the roof, and it is not running through. So there's my new aluminum roof. It needs cleaned and polished. And a solar panel mounted right there, and a roof rack mounted right there. So, let's take a look inside. I know, it's an 80s vintage camper, but here's our new roof made out of the wood. Trimmed off all my bolts so they're flush, and now you can see why I put an archway in as much as I could to give me enough clearance, because I am 6'2", and there's, you know, room there, but not a whole lot. So everything's fastened back in place. Now I'm going to continue back on the canvas project. I'm going to order some marine vinyl for that portion of it, and then get some more canvas for the sides. You know, marine canvas that's waterproof will go over the bunks. I don't want it dripping on me. Just got to decide on the color. Come here, Bubba's. Yeah, I think she's gone. But yeah, we'll have her ready for spring.